Hi, in this video I'm going to determine my favorite colors by Winsor and Newton. I'll set up a custom palette of unique colors that I feel are worth checking out specifically from this brand. These professional watercolors come in tubes, half pans, whole pans, sets, or dot cards. When looking over my collection, I noticed that they have changed their packaging appearance a few times. All of these tubes are noted as being manufactured in France, though they still have their headquarters in the UK. This brand has been around a while, but they are no longer as frequently talked about by new artists. Part of the problem is the overall high price and lack of unique or exciting marketing. More and more competition online has emerged with dramatically cheaper palette sets. When I got the 109 color dot card, I decided to work on swatch cards to include on my website's pigment database so that I may later compare them to other brands. I wanted to isolate which colors I felt were their most unique, especially narrowing down which pigments were hard to find elsewhere. I had started to record the painting of each swatch card, but found that some colors were more accurately displayed on a still image scan. After showing the full catalog, I'll take a closer look at the specific colors that made it into my palette. This brand focuses on fairly common single pigment colors more than they do mixtures. Most of them are light fast, but they do offer some fugitive colors, such as Opera, Aureolin, Rose Madder Genuine, which is made from the roots of the madder plant, as well as Prussian and Antwerp Blue. They have 8 cadmium-free colors named to draw attention to them being non-toxic lookalikes without giving them the standard word hue in the title. I can't recommend these cadmium alternatives due to their unusual secrecy about pigment ingredients, which is pretty standard to include in professional art supplies. Their refusal to do so as if it's a trade secret has made it so you can't be certain if it's made from a pigment that should be cheaper, if it's a multi-pigment mixture, about its true light fastness or toxicity. It's also possible that they made these colors similar to how gouache is made, where the opacity is increased by large particle size. Other than that, it was a pretty standard lineup with a fair amount of similar colors. You won't find much in the way of color separating granulation, rare minerals, or pearlescent mica paints. However, there are more than a few colors that I felt are worth investing in, and some options that can only be found within this brand. The first thing I do before setting up a new brand-specific palette is to determine my favorite primary color trio. This ensures that no matter which of the other colors I add later on, the palette will be capable of mixing a wide range of colors. I prefer a magenta, yellow, and cyan for vibrant mixes, but this could also be any type of warm or cool red, yellow, and blue, depending on if you're going for bright or muted natural mixes. For some brands, I start with earth tones like red iron oxide, yellow ochre, and ultramarine blue, which are typically reliable and light-fast pigments even in brands that otherwise offer a lot of fugitive colors. Permanent Rose PV19 is a lovely cool red with pink undertones, and true to its name, it would make gorgeous rose reds to floral pinks. Their transparent yellow, a PY150 nickel azo yellow, has a very large range of light to dark and is a strong mixer. You can use a tiny amount of this yellow to shift the permanent rose to red and orange, or shift a blue to a variety of deep and sunlit leaf greens. The color called aqua green is probably the most unique pigment in their entire catalog because it's not currently used by other brands for art materials. Aqua green is made from a phthalo pigment called Palomar Turquoise that does not currently have a pigment code and was manufactured for the automotive industry. Its particle size is slightly larger, resulting in minor granulation texture. It is more green-leaning than most phthalo blues, but still much closer to a blue than a phthalo green. Together, these 3 colors can be mixed to make a huge range of colors, as shown here in my color wheel palette. When mixed further, they could create neutral browns and grays. With the exception of a few rare pigments, many of the additional colors I'll add to my bigger palette will be cobalts and other granulating colors. This is not because Winsor and Newton's other less dramatic colors aren't nice, but rather because it's much cheaper to buy other brands' assorted pan sets for the generic mixing basics. Nearly every super cheap set you can get has a Hansa yellow, a phthalo blue and green, dioxazine purple, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, etc. If you don't already have a basic color set and are debating Winsor and Newton, the primary trio I just showed will give you a lot of mixing potential while also being unique enough to avoid the likeliness of buying a lot of duplicate colors in a set later on. Manganese Blue Hue PB15 is a slightly thicker particle, very minorly granulating, lighter version of a typical phthalo blue. I could see this being good for use as a convenient daytime sky color, especially for urban sketching. If you've ever accidentally painted a stroke of too intense phthalo blue or an odd-looking granulating cerulean or ultramarine sky that you weren't quite happy with, this could be that sky blue answer. Cobalt Blue Deep PB74 is a highly granulating, deep, rich blue, similar to ultramarine blue, but with a slightly deeper mass tone and a tendency to separate into a more pronounced texture, which remains apparent in mixes. PV15 Ultramarine Violet is a granulating light purple rarely found in student-grade paints and is one of the most beautiful I have seen in any brand. Smalt is also made from the same pigment, just manufactured slightly differently, such as adding heat to alter the color. Typically, the word hue is used to indicate that it's not the pigment it's named after. Smalt is a toxic historical pigment not offered by major manufacturers. Antique paintings using what they call Dumont's blue were created using the genuine PP32 ingredient smalt, a finely ground cobalt glass. This should be called Smalt Hue because it's just a blue-leaning shade of ultramarine violet. Once I gave Smalt a try, though, I decided it's worth having as a deeper, more purple-leaning alternative to ultramarine blue. The two versions of PG50, Cobalt Green and Cobalt Turquoise Light, also known as Cobalt Teal and other brands, are beautiful, strong examples of this granulating pigment. The Cobalt Turquoise Light is a perfect bright aqua, like a tropical seashore. It's fairly balanced between blue and green, but with a bright vibrancy that borderlines fluorescent. This color is pretty difficult to mimic with any mixture of watercolor. It adds dramatic visual interest to paintings, especially when using it against contrasting colors like orange and yellow. The cobalt green dilutes to a pale green, which is an ideal replacement for the more difficult to work with viridian color, and is a potent alternative to malachite, a rare mineral paint. Potter's Pink PR 233 is available only from a few major manufacturers worldwide, notably Daniel Smith and Schmincke. This pigment can be slightly difficult to work with when using a tube left out to dry, so I'm glad I got the pan version, which is formulated to work better from dry. I was able to reach a deeper saturation of color with minimal scrubbing compared to my Daniel Smith tube version. Permanent Mauve PV16, also called Manganese Violet in other brands, is a unique, darker granulating purple. I could see this being helpful to those interested in botanical art due to its easy lifting properties. This deeper color, along with the brighter Cobalt Violet PV14, provides two different magenta-leaning granulating purple options for creating unusual mixtures. It may be a suitable choice for mimicking texture in subjects like fruit, vegetables, and flowers. Cobalt Violet is a beautiful bright color with intense granulation. It is capable of making unique mixtures that would be nearly impossible with any other pigment. It is generally a weak and hard to re-wet pigment in most brands. This problem is made worse by trying to re-wet tube paints that have been left to dry, and my main regret is that I did not buy the pan version instead, which Winsor and Newton makes differently to help with re-wettability. Because they use varying amounts of gum arabic and oxycal for tubes versus pans, if you like to work from dry palettes, I would say it's safer to buy pans of certain problem colors like this one instead of the tube version. Cobalt Green Deep PG26 is a very dark, highly granulating green that takes on a natural-looking texture for painting foliage when mixed with transparent yellow. This version is slightly less warm, but more freely granulating than Schmincke's version, and is otherwise hard to match in other brands. Perylene green, PBK31, is a near black pigment that dilutes to a deep forest green color. It's a pigment that is not present in every brand, but it's useful as a pine green or in nighttime scenes where a natural neutral green is desired. This color has a huge value range from mass tone to diluted, creating opportunity for monochromatic studies such as foggy tree landscapes. Perylene Violet PV29 is a deep, dull violet leaning towards brown. It has a bit of shift from wet to dry, but the saturation can be built up in layers. This is not a common pigment. White Knights recently added it to their catalog, but it had a gritty texture. This Winsor and Newton version is much more finely ground with a smooth appearance. This is a good alternative to caput mortuum when granulation is not desired, such as in the deep dark areas of red flower shadows. Caput mortuum PR101 is a synthetic red iron oxide with significant granulation and minor color separation. It's only offered by a few other companies, the most similar being from Sennelier. You can also find this as PR102, a natural version of this pigment from Roman Schmincke. Depending on the source, it can have flecks of red, brown, and black that separate in wet washes. Magnesium brown, PY119, is a strongly granulating opaque brown that dilutes to a more transparent pale brown that could be used as a skin tone. This version is more granulating than Schmincke's spinel brown. As far as I know, Holbein was the only other watercolor manufacturer, but they discontinued their Mars Yellow version several years ago. Brown Matter PR206 is a very warm-leaning brown, slightly more red than Perylene Maroon. It can add a beautiful, healthy warmth to skin tones, such as in blush, tan, or lips. It dilutes to a lovely pale peach. It's only found in a select few pro-grade brands, usually called quinacridone burnt orange. Transparent orange is an intense reddish orange, which is labeled as DPP, a pyrrole that had been previously labeled as PO107 when it was first released. Chemically, this is a very recently created pigment that may not have a fixed number assigned to it yet. If the original PO107 number was correct, then this is not currently available anywhere else. It is slightly deeper in color than most pyrrole-based orange watercolors, with a beautiful, vast diluted range. Mars Black PBK11 is also called Lunar Black, Oxide Black, or Black Iron Oxide in other brands. This particular version is much more finely ground than Daniel Smith's Lunar Black, while retaining an amazing amount of granulation. This is very similar to their Bloodstone Genuine or Van Gogh's Oxide Black. It can be mixed with almost any color for instant dramatic granulation, especially similar to the popular dusk colors by Van Gogh, which use the same pigment. I like to use it when painting close-ups of animals with coarse fur, where the texture can imply more details than you are actually painting. Considering about half the colors in my final palette are granulating colors that reliably create a lot of noticeable texture, I'll have to learn to be careful about how many I use in a single painting. In this parakeet painting, I end up going a bit overboard with my enthusiasm for granulation. When you have too much texture in all areas of the painting, it can start to look busy. Regardless, it was a nice introduction to how these colors might be used together. I'll have to explore a better balance with limiting how many colors are used in one piece in the future, but hopefully this will generally demonstrate how these paints perform. I'd love to hear about what your favorite colors are, and if you would like to see any specific colors explored further in a comparison to other brands. I'll put a link to everything I used in this video in the description section below. Please feel free to comment, as I greatly appreciate your feedback. If you'd like to see more, you can find all of my detailed swatch card images, results from my independent lightfast testing, and other art supply reviews on my website. I'm currently building a huge pigment database where thousands of colors can be compared side by side with paint from other brands. Updates about this project, along with line art drawings and high-res color scans, are also available on Patreon. Thanks for watching.